Our lucky first presenter is Kiana Shaheen. She's an autonomy college student from biology, and her title, The Cardiovascular Effects of Vaping.
Thank you. Vaping. It's something we've all become familiar with, whether you've heard about it on the news or seen the vape clouds on the street. Although it may feel as if vaping just turned up yesterday, the first vapes were available commercially in 2010 when they were introduced as a safer alternative to cigarette smoking. Recently, young adults and even teens have made vaping their lifestyle. A recent study found that in Canada, children are beginning to vape at the young grades of 7th to 9th grade. In 7th to 9th grade. After this, there's been an increase in hospitalizations due to vaping-related illnesses. While the market for vaping is increasing, the research behind it is not. Although there are many hospitalizations due to vaping, there's been very minimal work done to address these adverse effects and look at the mechanisms underlying them. This is where my research comes into play. I was interested to see if vaping actually is safer for you than cigarette smoking when it comes to your cardiovascular health. To do this, I recruited participants on campus who vape or smoke cigarettes regularly. I looked at their blood pressure and their heart rate variability. Heart rate variability is the measure of time elapsed in between heartbeats. The lower your heart rate variability is, the less likely your heart is able to withstand stress, such as smoking. I assessed their blood pressure and heart rate variability prior to and post vaping for 2 minutes or smoking 1 cigarette. The blood pressure values were measured when the participants were laying down or standing upright. The graphs behind me depict the average blood pressure values while the participants were standing. The average blood pressure value before vaping was approximately 111/77. After 2 minutes of vaping, blood pressure increased to 120/79. In the cigarette group, their blood pressure was similar before smoking at 111/79. After smoking 1 cigarette, which took approximately 5 minutes, their blood pressure had a marginal increase up to 115/83. While this preliminary data does suggest that vaping is not safer than cigarette smoking, there's still more work to be done. I had a participant contact me after participating in the study to let me know that they were encouraged to quit smoking after being a participant and learning what cigarette smoking was doing to their body. I hope that by continuing this type of research, we're able to educate the public to invoke change at a population level. Thank you.
Next up, we have Lauren Drew. She's a Trail student studying political studies. Her title, Free Speech on Campus, a Canadian Crisis?
Good evening, friends and free thinkers. Let's unpack what Canadian news media says about this. The state of free speech on campus. Do they say we're in crisis? Why or why not? But mostly, how do they say it? This talk distills my honors thesis in political studies, where I investigate discourses manifested in Toronto Star, National Post, and Globe and Mail. My case study approach looks at interrelated controversies where so-called social justice warriors clash with so-called free speech advocates, namely Jordan Peterson, Lindsay Shepherd, and Faith Goldie. 3 discourses present strongly in Canadian newspapers. First, articles predominantly portray critics of Peterson, Shepherd, and Goldie as adhering to one discourse, the safety over speech discourse. As media portrays it, this discourse sees speech as able to induce harm, both psychological or physical, which marginalizes vulnerable people. Thus, speech is subject to necessary limits. Some articles are critical of this discourse, some see merit in it. Journalists themselves can generally be categorized into one of the following discourses: social justice censors or classical liberals. The social justice censors discourse views the university as an environment under attack, co-opted by an authoritarian left. Generally, they think that a university is a place to say what you want without limitation, because limits to them are both dangerous and disingenuous. They see appeals to marginalization and safety as cover-ups for left-wing dogma and silencing critics. Users of this discourse love to talk about George Orwell. Adherents of the classical liberal discourse are less keen to trash the social justice camp. They recognize a liberal conception of rights where individual rights are upheld against the state and balanced against the rights of others. Thus, they think safety over speech gets some of the latter part but is misguided. Classical liberals see open airing of controversial speech as sharpening reason for all involved and fostering a better intellectual climate. They love to quote John Stuart Mill. So there's all this hoopla about social justice, censorship, and speech rights on campus, but what gets left behind when we're obsessed with this? I propose that the media mind 3 other campus free speech concerns. First, corporate control. So Trent was recently sued by Subway and Subway won for our research. Will corporations scare us away from probing at questions in the public interest, especially when our funding is increasingly private? Second, precarious professorship. 53% of university course instructors are working in contract employment. Tenured professors have academic freedom, but can a contract instructor speak freely when their job is on the line? Third, the panopticon. We're always being filmed. At Trent, a politics professor was filmed arguing with a student, and then that professor was harassed when it was posted online. That professor self-censored when teaching the same course to me the following year. So in conclusion, the way we speak about speech matters. Media gives us a story, but perhaps it is not the whole story. Stay tuned for more.
Next, we have Rhiannon Duxbury. She's a Lady Eaton College student, studies psychology. Her title, oh, I get this. Why do I procrastinate? A qualitative look at students' procrastination experiences.
Okay. Do you ever find yourself pushing off work right until the last moment, even though you know it's going to hurt you in the long run? I know I definitely do with my thesis and this presentation and everything, really. But one of the questions I ask myself when I'm procrastinating is why? Why do I procrastinate? And I suspect that I'm not alone in asking that question. So typically in psychology, procrastination is looked at as a character trait. It's something internal and stable. You're probably really familiar with the idea of procrastination being because you don't have enough willpower or you don't have enough self-control to not procrastinate. But typically we see personality traits on a normal distribution, meaning that like only a few people show those really extreme procrastination behaviors. But we found that 88% of students exhibit frequent procrastination, which suggests that something else is going on here, specifically something situational. So something that's in the environment, something that's changing, like stress. So with my current thesis, my research, I wanted to take a look at that kind of more situational explanation. And a lot of quantitative research, like surveys, that kind of stuff, is typically looking at this more personality-based explanations for procrastination. But with qualitative research, it really gives us that chance to do more kind of exploration of the question and really get into students' individual experiences and specifically students' attributions of why they procrastinate. So to do this, I used a semi-structured interview format, which is basically just having like a kind of guided conversation with students about their procrastination. I asked them things like, what does procrastination look like to you? Why do you think you procrastinate? And then I recorded their answers, and I'm currently in the middle of my coding and kind of finding common themes between the different interviews. So some preliminary findings, some kind of themes that I've noticed popping up. If we're looking at what is procrastination, all of my students are pretty much on the same page for this one. As one put it really succinctly, it's pretty much just doing anything, pretty much just avoiding work and doing literally anything else. What do people procrastinate on? Those big assignments. So things you can't sit down and do in one sitting. So like essays, presentations, anything like that. And then that big question, why do people procrastinate? So there's a few different things. Social distractions, kind of social media, lack of interest. If you're not excited about it, you're less likely to want to do it. And then avoiding anxiety. Those big assignments are things that people really withdraw from. So you can kind of see those are all really situational explanations. So it seems like, situation does play a really important role in procrastination. So next time you find yourself procrastinating, instead of blaming yourself, getting angry at yourself, take a step back and think, what's in my environment that could be affecting my procrastination? Thanks.
Next up, we have Alyssa Salins. She's a Zosky College student studying International Development Studies, and her title, Can Poverty Alleviation Sustain Poverty?
Woo! Thank you. In Ghana, 23% of the population lives in extreme poverty. And to combat this, one of the things that the government is doing is they have put in place the Livelihood Empowerment Against Poverty, or LEAP program. And this intends to give cash transfers to the poorest in society so they'll increase consumption and empower themselves. That seems pretty good, right? Well, that's what myself and a few other students wanted to find out. So in addition to doing some literature reviews and meeting with government officials, we traveled to the rural community of Mishio in northern Ghana to conduct field work and learn from community members who are beneficiaries of LEAP exactly how this program was playing out. And based on what we learned from the community, I'm going to argue that LEAP is an example of a poverty alleviation program that is working to disempower the poor. You see, LEAP takes an income-based approach and sees poverty as simply a lack of money. But poverty is so much more multidimensional than this. At its root, poverty is caused by powerlessness, and LEAP completely overlooks this when focusing solely on monetary gains. It also fails to provide any sort of income security to the poor. On the left there, you'll see the maximum amount that a household of 6 beneficiaries can receive from LEAP, which is the equivalent of 152 Canadian dollars per year. Now, what baffles me, though, is that this is less than half the extreme poverty line. And when you become dependent on these finite amount of funds for things like education, medication, and school supplies, and food, of course, if all of a sudden you can't access these funds because, say, you've hurt yourself and you can't travel to the pickup location, then you're in a worse off position than you were to begin with. So in effect, what LEAP is doing is it is sustaining the poor below the poverty line, and this does not allow them to live in dignity or rise from their poverty. So what can be done about this? Well, to empower the poor, this program needs to focus on capabilities, which is to say what people can do with the money they get and not on the money itself. And part of this is consistently partnering pro-poor policies with other programs like social safety nets. The Ghana School Feeding Program, in this case, was an example, to make sure that they can use the money they have in the best interest that they can. So the next time you think about poverty reduction and empowerment initiatives, consider if this empowerment is simply sustaining poverty. Thank you.
All right, our next speaker is Claire Sislak. She's a Champlain student studying chemistry, and her title, Functionalization of Waste Commodity Polystyrene, a New Destiny for Styrofoam Clamshells.
Woo!
Good evening, judges, fellow presenters, and guests. We are all familiar with the image of the overworked university student eating food out of a styrofoam takeout container. Styrofoam is a commercial foam which is made of the plastic polystyrene, which is 100% recyclable. But Canada only recycles 9% of the plastic that it produces, leaving the rest to either be incinerated or destined for the landfill. I found out the hard way that Peterborough has stopped accepting styrofoam for recycling when municipal collection left styrofoam behind in my blue bin. Why send a recyclable material to the garbage dump? Well, being 98% air, it is incredibly expensive to transport large volumes of styrofoam that correspond to small amounts of polystyrene. That is why I am trying to upcycle waste polystyrene through a novel green synthesis. Becoming a precursor for a valuable new material is a better destiny than becoming garbage. The structure of polystyrene is made of these long chains consisting of this basic repeat unit. Polymeric properties such as flexibility and strength are directly determined by characteristic structural features called functional groups. Like a playground offers diverse amenities to allow children to play however they want, Polystyrene is a chemist's playground that has all sorts of sites for transformations if we apply the right reaction parameters. The aromatic ring in red is a popular site, like the monkey bars that everyone wants to play on, with past additions producing useful materials like ion exchange resins for water purification and the Merrifield resin for protein synthesis. In yellow, the benzylic position is more like a rope ladder. Not as popular as the aromatic ring, but a good scaffold nonetheless. To test this underutilized site, I reclaimed 99% of waste polystyrene that compares exactly to the virgin material and produced an iron titania catalyst to hopefully functionalize the benzylic position. My catalyst enables a cool A3 coupling reaction that allows the combination of 3 reactants with specific functional groups to form one product easily. Imagine being able to adjust the knobs and sockets of puzzle pieces to form connections that weren't available before. This is what my catalyst does to polystyrene and 2 functional groups called amines and aldehydes. While my research is still ongoing, I'm excited to explore the new potential that polystyrene functionalization holds to turn a useless garbage material into a new resource. Thank you.
Next up, we have Sade Roden. She's a Zosky College student studying chemistry, and her title, really interesting, Seafood Waste as a Renewable Resource.
Woo! Thank you. Good evening, everyone. How many of you eat shrimp, by a show of hands? How many of you eat the shells? I didn't think so. Did you know that the exoskeleton of our seafood waste is comprised of 15 to 40% chitin, the second most abundant biopolymer on Earth? However, in its natural state, chitin is impossible to process. It needs to be converted into chitosan, its flexible film-forming derivative. Chitosan is very useful in biomedical applications such as drug delivery systems and can be used as antimicrobial wound dressings. But with all this potential, where does all our seafood waste go? Annually, 6 to 8 million tons of seafood waste is produced globally. That waste ends up in landfills, back into the sea, or can cost up to $150 per ton to dispose of. In my research, I use a green and sustainable method to divert those shells from the waste and convert them into a renewable resource, making them into materials with improved properties for biomedical applications. How do I do this? In a green and sustainable manner. Typically, to convert chitin to chitosan, chitin is chemically treated for 6 to 8 hours under high temperatures and harsh conditions. This conversion is called deacetylation. To achieve a high degree of deacetylation, longer reaction times are required. Longer reaction times require more energy. However, in my optimized process, I have used a familiar microwave as a reactor to conduct the same reaction in just 10 minutes, saving 99% energy and achieving almost 80% conversion. But the extracted chitosan is like a flexible film that it has low mechanical strength and can be broken easily. Therefore, I need to make sure I make it stronger. What I have done in the second part of my research is that I've used a sustainable method to weave my chitosan in a cross-linking method where I use glycerol and silica-based precursor. Glycerol can be extracted from waste vegetable oil, and silica is the material that sand is made up of. This reaction is done entirely in water, which is a safe and green solvent. My ongoing work is to test the properties of my hybrid chitosan hydrogel, which I expect to have increased strength and flexibility and swelling properties. With the final properties of my hydrogel, through my research, I have found the potential for an energy-efficient process that minimizes seafood waste and converts it into a renewable resource that is both renewable and sustainable. Thank you.
speaker is Kara Livingston. She's an Autonomy College student studying environmental studies. Her title, Volunteering to Trailblaze the Pathway to Stewardship and Kinship. Woo!
Do you remember playing outside as a child, exploring the local woods, streams, and parks? If you do, you might be showing your age. Children have been spending less time outside compared to their parents and grandparents. This has created a generation of children who feel a disconnect with their surrounding environments. Getting children back outside may seem like a challenge. However, there is an organization in Peterborough called Pathways to Stewardship and Kinship who is trying to change this by creating age-specific environmental programming in schools, community groups, and families. They have created partnerships and received funding to provide resources which make environmental education easy to implement in local schools. Their goal is to reconnect children with their natural environments. In order to understand why this group enthusiastically volunteers their time, I interviewed 7 volunteers one-on-one. After asking them 9 questions, I gained an insight on their motivations to be part of the program, their current inspirations, and their hopes for the future. I hope that by better understanding motivation to volunteer, it may be possible to create other successful volunteer organizations, specifically in environmental education. My interviews told me that volunteers knew there was a need to create opportunities for children to be outside before their involvement in the program. They may have been from a health background and noticed that there was a decline in spiritual, physical, or mental health. Or they may have been from an education background and noticed that teachers and students lacked common knowledge on local environments and that students were beginning to have shorter attention spans. Most of the volunteers told stories about playing outside as a child and wanting to have younger generations create their own memories of the outdoors. Currently, these individuals continue to volunteer their time because they create a community of like-minded individuals who care about children's well-being. They are excited with how successful their program has become and are motivated to return because they feel a strong connection with the group. Moving into the future, the team envisions the program to become more successful. They foresee the program to break political and geographical barriers, having a version of their programming in different school boards, community groups, and households across the province, country, and eventually across the world. If successful, the team imagines a transformed generation who feels comfortable in nature, understands the importance of local nature, and why it deserves to be protected. It is apparent these volunteers are motivated to continue their work in environmental education because the Pathways to Stewardship and Kinship team creates a sense of belonging. These members have a belief in the project and hope for future generations to have a connection with nature. Hopefully, after a few years when I ask, do you remember playing outside as a child? The audience, no matter the age, will give an enthusiastic yes. Thank you. Thank you.
Next up, we have Graham Higgins. Graham's a student from Lady Eaton College studying psychology. His title, Legal Regulation of Cocaine, a proposed multi-tiered model for Canada.
The war on drugs has been an epic failure. Since 1971, when Richard Nixon infamously declared this war, the US alone has spent an estimated $1 trillion. After over 50 years, there's little indication of any lasting success. Drugs available under the black market are often contain harmful adulterants and are of unknown purity. Even if availability to a product is effectively reduced, it is often replaced by more harmful alternatives such as fentanyl or designer drugs that have little to no history of human consumption. Thankfully, there is growing awareness of both those directly involved, such as users and law enforcement, and the general public that something needs to change. Around the globe, new developments have increasingly focused on harm reduction. While initiatives such as safe consumption sites, needle exchange programs, and decriminalization have made tremendous progress, these are not real solutions. I believe to make real progress, we need to end prohibition. Recently, support for full legalization has been increasing. especially evident in Canada with our recent approach to cannabis. However, unlike cannabis that's perceived as being relatively harmless, there's good reason to take greater precaution with higher risk drugs like cocaine or heroin. Risks associated with each drug are unique, meaning that a single system or approach is unfeasible. Unrestricted retail access will increase availability and may encourage unsafe patterns of use. On the other hand, too restrictive of an approach will fail to adequately compete with the black market. Ultimately, we need balance, a system with evidence-based policies tailored to each substance and formulation that ultimately maximally reduces the harms of these substances while satisfying the needs of most users. As part of my research, I've been developing my system to represent this vision using cocaine as a reference. My model involves 3 tiers designed to make the lower risk options most attractive to the user. Informed by available toxicological and epidemiological research, my tiers ascend in order according to risk and corresponding restrictions. Tier 1 involves unrestricted access to natural products like coca tea that are unrestricted access to things like coca tea that have minimal risk considering low cocaine concentrations. While Tier 2 involves take-home access of powder cocaine restricted by quantities and frequencies, while Tier 3 involves access to higher quantities under supervised consumption. Thank you.
All right, next up we have Danielle Harper. She's a trail student studying biology, and she's going to tell us how to spice up your life, blood vessel formation, and cellular stress.
Everyone in this room is familiar with stress. It's a part of everyday life. But did you know that our cells can also experience stress? While they might not have exams to study for, or an impending thesis to write, there are many ways for our cells to become stressed, including exposure to radiation, infections, and toxic chemicals. This year, my research has focused on one particular toxin capable of inducing significant cellular stress, a heavy metal called cadmium. Now, cadmium is one of the hundreds of harmful chemicals found in cigarette smoke, but it's also used in the production of rechargeable batteries and plastic pigments. Cadmium has also been found to disrupt angiogenesis. This is the process of blood vessel formation. Angiogenesis is essential during early fetal development and continues to play an important role in adult life, ensuring all of our tissues have a sufficient blood supply. Now, the purpose of my study is to investigate the role of cadmium-induced oxidative stress on angiogenesis. I'm also interested in whether the harmful effects of cadmium can be prevented using the spice curcumin, a naturally occurring antioxidant. Oxidative stress occurs when there's an imbalance between free radicals and antioxidants within or around the cell. Free radicals are highly reactive electron-stealing molecules that cause the breakdown of important cellular components, ultimately leading to cell death. Antioxidants, such as curcumin, are able to donate electrons to free radicals, thus stabilizing them and reducing oxidative stress. Curcumin is the active compound found in the spice turmeric, which has been used for thousands of years as a traditional medicine for a wide range of conditions. Past research suggests that curcumin is able to directly neutralize free radicals, but also stimulate cells to produce their own antioxidant proteins. I'm using a model called the fetal mouse metatarsal explant to simulate angiogenesis. This is a special type of cell culture used to grow blood vessels in vitro, meaning outside of a living organism. I treat the growing vessels every other day with a specific concentration of cadmium, with or without the addition of curcumin. Then, after 7 days, I use imaging techniques to identify patterns of vessel growth under the microscope. I'm still in the process of collecting my results, but I expect to see an increase in vessel growth for samples treated with both cadmium and curcumin compared to those treated with cadmium alone. This research has the potential to strengthen our understanding of cadmium toxicity, as well as the potential benefits of curcumin on vascular health. And just maybe, when it comes to stress, whether you're a Spice Girls fan or a cell under free radical attack. All you need to do is spice up your life. Thank you.
Next up, we have Shannon Featherston. She's a Lady in College student doing research in media studies and cultural studies, and her title is Rediscovering a College, the Shortcomings of Public Memory.
What's in a college? In Lady Eaton's case, there's a couple thousand students, some academic departments, and some wonderful staff. There's also seminar rooms, student spaces, and a senior common room for fellows. When I came to Trent 4 years ago, I had no idea how much Lady Eaton College was going to mean to me. I've lived in residence, I've volunteered with the college cabinet, I work as a student ambassador in the college office, and I've taken classes there. And now, for the better part of a year, I've spent in the archives researching what makes the college tick. I'm not going to stand here and try to tell you 50 years of history in 3 minutes, but I am going to talk to you about how important collective memory is in terms of public history. Collective memory is a term coined by French sociologist and philosopher Maurice Halbwach, and it differs from history because it represents how past events are remembered by a community based on said community's values, narratives, and biases. From a public history standpoint, collective memory is important because it paints a picture of what was and what remains important to a specific community. But perhaps what's more intriguing than what we remember is what we forget. For instance, in Lady Eaton College, we covet the toad. We toast the toad at our college dinners, there's a toad award, and we have an annual spring event involving the toad. As you can see, our college mascot is the toad, and our badge that accompanies our coat of arms is a toad. But why the toad? Most students don't know where that legend came from. In January 1969, the Dons of the college signed the guest book with the location Toad Hall as a reference to Kenneth Grahame's The Wind in the Willows. Over time, we've forgotten the joke, but the toad still remains important to the college. For the past year, I have been rediscovering Lady Eaton College and uncovering valuable information about how the college came to be as we know it today. I spent 50-odd years in the Trent archives, going through 50 years of cabinet meetings, old issues of the Drumline and Eaton's catalog, which are 2 student publications, and photographs and documents, which include everything from the original planning brief to the master architect to thank you notes from guests of the college. Notably, is the thank you note from Marion Pearson, who visited with her husband, Lester B. Pearson, former Prime Minister, in 1971. I also sat down and interviewed past Dons, former principals, Dale Standen and Arm Kruger, as well as Catherine Curl, who was our college assistant for 15 years. There are so many benefits to doing a public history project like this one. The main benefit being a deeper appreciation and understanding of how the college formed into what it is today and how over 50 years it has maintained a consistently lovely and home-like atmosphere. I hope that by completing this project, I can connect some of the dots that have been lost along the way and help students and alumni alike understand the college's traditions.
Next, we have Catherine Nocera. She's a student from the Durham GTA campus studying psychology. Let's go to her title slide, that's better, right? Her title, We're All in This Together, The Influence of Family-Based Treatment on Adolescent Substance Use.
I want you all to take a moment and reflect about a person in your life who has struggled with substance abuse. It's quite possible that this someone is between the ages 15 to 24, as youth have the highest rate of substance abuse problems compared to any other age group. This is alarming, as substance abuse, especially during adolescence, can lead to devastating effects such as broken relationships, long-term substance abuse, and even premature death. Researchers have found that family functioning, or the quality of parent-child relationships, is related to youth substance abuse. For instance, substance abuse is lower in families characterized by open communication, trust, and close emotional bonds. It's believed that these families provide support systems for their children, encourage positive behaviors, and set appropriate limits and boundaries. Researchers found that family-based programs are helpful in preventing youth addiction. However, there's limited research examining the effectiveness of such programs for youth already struggling with an addiction. So I examined how family functioning impacts treatment success among youth attending a family-based treatment center in Toronto. A key feature of the program was to involve parents in the process by having them attend weekly therapeutic sessions and learning workshops with their child. And I wanted to know whether family functioning improved from the start of treatment to the end, and whether this was related to their treatment outcomes, such as decreased alcohol use. To answer these questions, I analyzed pre-existing data from questionnaires that were completed by 14 to 20-year-olds at various time points throughout their treatment. The first questionnaire measured aspects of family functioning, such as level of parent-child communication, and the second measured frequency of alcohol consumption in the past 3 months. As predicted, family functioning did improve from the start of treatment to the end, and this increase was associated with their treatment success. So those youth who reported greater improvements in family functioning also had greater decreases in alcohol consumption at their post-treatment follow-up. Results from my research highlight the important role that parents play in the life of their adolescents, and also sheds light on the effectiveness of family-based programs in adolescent treatment. Not only did this program repair damaged parent-child relationships, but it reduced the harmful effects of substance abuse, both of which will continue to positively impact youth for the rest of their lives. Thank you.
Thanks, Erin.
Another psychology talk, completely different. This is coming from Sarah Stuk. She is a Zosky College student, and her title is, Does Social Anxiety Increase Cannabis Use? A Longitudinal Exploration.
Many people have tried weed, especially with it recently becoming legal. Trying and using weed has become more common. But what predisposes us for using weed? Not only using, but depending on. Hello, my name is Sarah Stuk, and I, along with my supervisor, Dr. Laura Sommerfeld, are exploring the relationship between cannabis, or weed, and social anxiety, which is the fear concerning social situations in which one might be judged. So the research looking at social anxiety and cannabis has yet to be deeply studied. However, the relationship with alcohol use has been. So from this research with alcohol and the limited amount with cannabis, some major theories have been proposed. So the first is the self-medication hypothesis, being that in order to cope with a stressful situation, one will use the substance in order to cope. The second is conformity motives, that they'll use it in order to fit in. And the third is the buffer perspective, that says that social anxiety actually reduces the amount of cannabis one will use because they'll have less instances to use it. As well, other influences have impacted this relationship. So demographics being their age and gender influence, their socio-political, that it used to be illegal, psychosocial being the social influences, and then the emotional competencies, being how to cope. So from this, we're seeing that there's been some conflicting data looking at it, and as well as some main limitations. So I aim to address these main limitations, and I hypothesize that I'll find a positive association between social anxiety and cannabis use, which is similar to alcohol, with it being higher for younger ages, for men, and that coping will explain this relationship. So I'm looking at a longitudinal database, so I have 5 years of data looking at about 4 waves, and I have over 1,800 participants. So I'm looking at their demographics, their psychopathology, being their anxiety and their substance use of alcohol and cannabis, and their coping strategies. So I'm just beginning to explore my data, and I'm just beginning to find my preliminary findings. But one thing I've already found is the main problem is that I have a very small sample of those meeting the criteria for social anxiety disorder. So I have just under 100 people that meet the criteria, whereas I have over 1,200 who do not. Due to this, I've had to look at social anxiety in many different ways, such as their highest score over all of the waves or if they ever met criteria. So looking at the table over here, the red is the significant or meaningful results. And as we can see, the relationship with cannabis has been inconsistent, though with alcohol it has been more consistent. So because of these inconsistencies, I'm also going to look at age, gender, and their coping to see if this will help affect the relationship or strengthen it in any way. One study also suggested that the use does not differ based on social anxiety, but their dependency on it does. So I'm going to be exploring that next. So overall, with cannabis just becoming legal, now is the prime time to explore the relationship seen between social anxiety and weed. And I hope that from my research, I can find some major influences to better explain this relationship. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Sam Blondeau. She is a representative of both Durham GTA campus and Trail College. She studies both child and youth studies and sociology, and she's brought those together for her paper titled Squeegee Kids Are Not Broken Windows.
For years, I've been trying to explain to people that kids don't run to the streets. They're running away from something. And tonight, there'll be close to 7,000 kids in Canada that will have no place to call home. One of the realities of being a street kid is that you know that society looks at you like you're a problem that needs to be solved. And today, I stand here as a former street kid of the 90s to talk to you about the research that I've been doing all year on the history of street-involved youth in Canada. So my big research question was, I wanted to look at why Ontario decided to criminalize squeegee work with street-involved youth instead of some of the alternatives they were looking at the time, like the squeegee work program. So I looked over 50 articles of literature, from research papers to policy papers, and I was able to come up with 3 kind of main key themes that I pulled out with how people were looking at them. There was the biology, the victims, and the villains. So in the 1920s, essentially what they thought was that runaways were born, right? So all you had to do was make it so people who were homeless couldn't have kids. Then we wouldn't have a runaway problem. Then in the 70s, it became a mental health issue. It became a diagnosis. We had the runaway reaction. It wasn't until the 80s that society started to look at street kids as a victim of circumstances that were just beyond their control. But the problem was that didn't last very long. In 1982, there was this theory that popped up in a magazine called broken windows theory. This theory is taught in sociology classes and has been for decades. But the problem is that there's no real scientific evidence to back up what they're saying. What they say is that in neighborhoods that have things like broken windows and graffiti, there's a higher chance of crime happening. Which makes a lot of sense until I tell you they say squeegee kids are the broken windows. In the 90s, my friends went to the street corners with squeegees in order to try to make money as a way to have some dignity instead of sitting on the corner and begging. But what happened was Canada created the squeegee kid phenomenon. And then all of a sudden, we had a war on squeegee kids. A war on kids who were just trying to figure out how to survive in a world that didn't even want them to exist. One of the really interesting things I found was in all the studies done on squeegee kids back then, they commented on how positive squeegee work was for street-involved youth. There was improved mental health. There was less incidence of crime, which actually goes against what broken windows theory was trying to tell us. So what happened was Ontario enacted the Ontario Safe Streets Act January 1st, 2000. This criminalized squeegee kids. And even though squeegee kids have pretty much disappeared from Canada, the amount of tickets that have been issued under this act are enormous, to the point where Michael Bryant, the former Attorney General, has tried very hard to get this act taken away. None of it has ever worked. I hope to one day be a part of a group that will be able to get this act taken down so that the consequences from this idea don't get any worse than they already are. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Jeremiah Kashor. He's a Lady college student studying linguistics, and his title is The Impossible Task of Language Acquisition: How Children Use Meaning to Learn Words.
Thank you. Is it on? Thank you. I hope it's clear that language is not impossible. I mean, we're all here, we're all talking. What I'd like to suggest to you over the next 3 minutes, 2 minutes and 55 seconds, is that we do have good reason to think that there are certain things about language that suggest an element of impossibility. There's a puzzle about it that's very difficult to solve. So for example, consider the fact that just by virtue of knowing a language, you're able to understand a literally infinite set of possible expressions and utterances. Now, how is it that a child can learn this remarkable capacity given no explicit instruction and also on the basis of such limited empirical facts? A child does not need very much in order to learn language, and yet they do it all of the time. Not only this, but it's also the case that children acquire literally one of any of the 6,000 existing languages in the exact same way, with the exact same frequency, and with the exact same ease. This slide should have been up there. languages are not only vastly different, but they're also very complex internally. And so it just adds to this mystery of what's going on with language acquisition. So consider this property of infinity first. Over the last 60 years, research has suggested that all languages rely on the exact same operation, the same structural building operation. And it's not that they're infinite per se, but rather that the structural operation itself generates an infinite set of sentences. It's a finite system that generates infinitely. All right, and it's universal. But what do we say about the other two faculties? The other two qualities of complexity and of substantial differences between languages. Well, the answer is that there's a universal component to the grammar, to what's inside your mind, the narrow faculty of language. And there's this broader sort of, literally, the faculty of language in the broad sense that contains everything else that adds to this complexity. All right, so what follows from all of this? Well, what I'd like to suggest in the next 44 seconds is that some interesting things follow from this. First of all, if it is the case that there is this one universal faculty of language that's invariant from person to person, it follows that the ways that meanings are combined in languages work is invariant from speaker to speaker. And as recent research has suggested, it's possible that language and thought have literally co-evolved. The recursive property of language is the recursive property of thought, and that acquisition functions according to these principles, and everything else follows from these other broader principles. Thank you very much. Thank you.
We have Valentina Zuluaga. She's a Zosky College student studying psychology. And here's a mouthful. Her title, Psychoneuroimmunology. I did it. A new perspective on stress.
Humans experience stress during every waking moment of the day. How we as individuals perceive the stressors are unique, but yet they exert the same physiological and psychological effects on the body. By trying to control those stressors, we inadvertently cause wear and tear on the body, which might lead to illness and disease that can be deadly if left untreated. Today, chronic stress affects the majority of the population, but few are aware of how negatively this pervasive phenomenon may impact their body. Wanting to investigate this further in my health psychology research paper through both a literature review and a key informant interview with Dr. Alvarez, I studied psychoneuroimmunology, a fascinating new field of science which is largely unknown. Psychoneuroimmunology conceptualizes health as a multidimensional field in which psychological states such as the day-to-day manifestation of chronic stress and depression may impact health by weakening our immune system. The suppression of our immune system decreases levels of natural killer cells. Moreover, it increases levels of hormones such as cortisol, which causes inflammation in our tissues. In my literature review, I found that stress experienced prenatally, perinatally, and during childhood can increase the likelihood of developing illnesses years before it will naturally occur. Moreover, psychoneuroimmunology has demonstrated that stress-induced inflammation in our tissues increases the likelihood of, there you go. Thank you.
Approximately 25% of all police reported violent crime is perpetrated within a romantic partnership. Scenarios such as this are likely what most people think of when they hear intimate partner violence. But what about abuse that does not leave a mark? Emotional abuse can involve a variety of psychological tactics, such as putting one's partner down, threatening them, or isolating them from others, and it is estimated to be the most common form of intimate partner violence. Although less observable, emotional abuse can still have extreme consequences, leading to depression or other mental health issues. Another aspect of life I believe is affected by emotional abuse are dreams. Waking day events affect the themes and imagery expressed in dreams. By simply examining dream content, researchers have been able to accurately predict information about people's hobbies, emotional well-being, and spirituality. Although a pervasive problem, the connection between emotional abuse and dream imagery has not yet been investigated. This raises an important question. Do emotionally abusive relationships foster dream imagery that is distinct from healthy relationships? I had university students complete questionnaires that measured their relationship satisfaction and experience with emotional abuse within their current romantic relationship or one that had recently ended. I also had them keep a dream journal. I expect that those who report being victimized will have dreams that are more emotionally intense, negative, and threatening. Their dreams may include not being able to scream or feeling trapped. I also expect that they will have fewer positive emotional dreams than those who are in a healthy relationship. Emotional abuse is deceptive, more challenging to detect than other forms of abuse. And that's why these findings will have important therapeutic implications. Sometimes victims don't even realize they are in an emotional abusive relationship, thinking they're the cause of the problem. By identifying the dream imagery associated with emotional abuse, therapists would be able to uncover that victimization and help change victims' perceptions so they understand that they are not the cause of the problem. Healthy, intimate relationships increase the likelihood of living a long and good quality life. Being able to detect emotional abuse through dreams is an important first step in allowing victims to better themselves and flourish in life. Thank you.